Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge was a fairly competent first entry of the Mega Man series on the original Nintendo Game Boy, retaining the game's trademarks and high standards with regards to both the gameplay and presentation. Although it was a short game with 6 levels of play, it proved that Capcom was fully capable of bringing the intense action of the NES titles to the portable Game Boy, and people were anxiously awaiting the next entry in the sub-series. And then Mega Man 2 came along. Let's reflect on history a bit for a moment. Mega Man 2, the NES game, brought about many new features to what made the original Mega Man a solid game, and ended up being one of the series' defining moments. Praised by many gamers as the absolute pinnacle in Mega Man gaming. While it would be naive to expect the Game Boy equivalent to be as groundbreaking, at least it would be able to add subtle improvements and bring it more in line with the NES entries. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, did it? The first sign of trouble I encountered when playing Mega Man 2 on the Game Boy was when I started up the game and the title music hit. Almost immediately, ear rape came to mind. And then I started a new game and the stage select appears. More ear rape. Finally, we progress through the gameplay. Even more ear rape. And it never ends. So in case you haven't grasped what I'm getting at here, sound's a rather weak point in Mega Man 2, and that's putting it mildly. The sound effects are roughly similar in quality to the previous game, perhaps less so in some cases, but the music in this game takes a massive nosedive in the worst possible way. Whereas the previous game offered neat renditions of classic boss tunes mixed with new tracks, this game contains completely new music and none of it sounds the least bit appealing or even any good. It's not to say the tunes themselves are horrible, on the contrary, some of them are actually quite decent, when they're remixed by other people. It's the instrumentation that destroys the soundtrack here and causes it to sound like crap overall, but perhaps the other sticking point for me personally is that even if better instrumentation was used, this soundtrack doesn't feel distinctively Mega Man. It feels like something pulled out of stock 8-bit archive number 87 or something. Even when remixed, the tunes sound like they fit better with some other generic title, or at least some other Capcom title, but not necessarily Mega Man. No doubt there's going to be some folks who will claim that, well, this is Game Boy. You can't really expect much out of Game Boy. To which I can only reply, explain Mega Man 1, which came out before this game and sounds better. The graphics in Mega Man 2 do not fare any better either. While Mega Man himself looks alright, a little crooked in some cases, but alright, you do recognize him, the various enemies look somewhat awkward. The new enemies that they brought over from the NES titles appear to have been scaled down poorly, and enemies that appeared in the previous game look far worse in this entry. Mind-boggling is the way they treated the mini-bosses in this game, such as the flame-throwing Wolf Bot in Woodman stage, or the Cat Bot in Top Man stage. When killed off in the NES games, they had a spectacular explosion. When killed in this game, they blow up just like any other generic enemy. Not very satisfying. And then there are the stage graphics, which try to emulate the looks of their NES counterparts, but end up doing a shoddy job of it. Not only do these levels look extremely lackluster even by Game Boy standards, but there are sections in some of these levels that either have simplistic backdrops or forego any backdrop altogether and simply stick with white emptiness, as if they couldn't be bothered with designing extra graphics. Again, Mega Man 1 looked better. So far I've been pretty negative about Mega Man 2, but while audio and visuals did take a mega hit to the Mega Nuts, I can at least take solace in the fact that Mega Man 2 plays very much like a Mega Man game, with all the mechanics associated with the series present and accounted for. For the most part, control in Mega Man 2 is pretty solid and responsive, as any Mega Man game should be. Keeping up with the formula of the previous Game Boy entry, Mega Man 2 is based on the gameplay of the NES Mega Man 3, all the while putting you against robot masters from Mega Man 2 and 3, including Top Man. Like the previous Game Boy entry, Mega Man 2 also features an exclusive robot master named Quint, who hops around on a pogo stick and ends up being pretty easy to beat unless you let him win for some reason. As was the case with Mega Man 3, you have your slide, your rush adapters, all of which you have to earn this time around, including the rush coil, which is normally something you start off with, energy tanks, and the utterly useless top spin, which shall not be featured on this video because I'm too embarrassed to use it here. Look, I'll be honest, it might have some use in Mega Man 3, but here I just set it aside with the other useless item, the pogo stick from the future Sakugarne, or Sakugarn as some people like to call it. I hardly ever use the crash bombs either. Or is it clash bombs? Experimental new prototype weapon or lazy localization? You decide, because I honestly don't care. So the whole premise of Mega Man 2 is similar to the previous Game Boy Mega Man. You fight through the initial 4 robot stages. Once you clear those, you enter the first Wily stage, which is nothing more than a mere teleporter stage leading you to 4 more mini stages where the remaining robot masters reside. However, you're not given any indication as to which teleporter will lead you to which stage, but longtime fans should be familiar with the stages, especially considering how close they are in terms of layout and design to the original NES levels. Although they do try to vary the content a bit. There's additional underwater segments in Woodman and Topman's levels, presumably to justify the existence of Rush Marine in the game, but for the most part these are just rehashes of pre-existing levels slightly tweaked to fit the small Game Boy screen, and as I said before, the end result looks quite poor visually. Challenge-wise, it's not much better. Much like Mega Man 2 on the NES, Mega Man 2 on the Game Boy is a bit on the easy side, especially once you acquire Rush Jet, which pretty much lets you skip over the usual tricky spots such as the disappearing magnetic blocks and some additional platforming elements. In fact, that's pretty much the only use Rush Jet has in this game, as there aren't any segments that require the jet in any way, shape, or form. The same can be said for Rush Marine. You can use it to circumvent the underwater obstacles and challenges and all that, but there's never any situation where you would actually really need it. In fact, Rush Coil is pretty much the only item that you need to reach higher spots altogether, but even then you have Rush Jet, which uses far less energy than the Coil does. Okay. Setting all of that aside, Mega Man 2 doesn't pose much of a challenge. There are seldom few situations where you would actually need any of your master weapons. Hell, you could spam Metal Blades all you want because nothing else matters. Even segments involving ladder climbing is almost effortlessly easy, especially due to a little nugget of programming that allows Mega Man to climb ladders while his hit animation is playing. Under normal circumstances, when you get knocked off the ladder. Here, not so much. There are energy tanks and extra lives scattered about, but you hardly ever need them unless you were stupid enough to use the pogo stick to drill a few holes into Wily's skull. Worst mistake I'll ever make, it'll never happen again, and that's a big fat lie, but I digress. Only time things could get tense is the latter half of the game where you're fighting the Mega Man 3 bosses, and this is mostly due to the fact that even after you clear a stage and attain a new master weapon and a brand spanking new password to save your progress, your existing arsenal does not get recharged to full power. So you have to take care to conserve your weapon's energy, but again there's rarely any time where you would actually need them. Overall, I could say with the utmost confidence that Mega Man 2 is the weakest of the Game Boy offerings, simply due to the somewhat hodgepodge nature that the game was put together. While Mega Man 2 has most of the elements that make it a Mega Man game, the thing feels like a third-grade science project or a rare bootleg entry from Korean aftermarkets or something of the like rather than an official release. Everything from the subpar graphics to the awful sound quality is well below the standards of what an 8-bit Mega Man should be. It's an extremely sharp drop in quality, especially compared to its predecessor, which did such a great job of bringing classic Mega Man goodness to the Game Boy without compromise. But even with all the negative aspects of the game, which is mostly based on presentation, Mega Man 2 still plays very much like classic Mega Man, and despite the relative easiness of the game, it's still a fun, enjoyable game that should be given a try on a rainy day. It's not a high point in the Mega Man series, but then again there are far worse Mega Man titles out there.